Hello everyone, welcome to the first module of the course, Film Studies. Film or cinema is a composite art form which incorporates features of many fine art forms, performance art traditions, conventions of literature, and technological devices, ranging from the camera to the computer. Cinema is the storytelling form or the narrative form of 20th century. A film is often referred to as a movie, a picture, a feature, a talkie, a flick, or a cinema. However, when the reference is to an individual motion picture, the word film or movie is generally used. On the other hand, normally the word cinema is preferred when the reference is to movie as a form of art, or cinema as a cultural practice, or cinema as a social institution. In the present context of high globalization, with increased mobility of people around the world, as a representational practice, cinema now speaks more or less in a universal idiom. And cinema is identified as one of the very profitable global entertainment industries. Therefore, as an art form, or as an entertainment mode, or as an individual product, it's very important that we know the origin, development, and contemporary state of the cinematic culture. In this module, we discuss some of the major turning points in the history of early films. Here the phrase early films means films produced from 1895 to 1927. In 1895, we had the first public screening of films. In 1927, the first feature-length sound film or the talkie was released. Following are the learning objectives of this module: to trace the history of early films, to understand the major features of early films, to figure out the pioneers of early films, and to understand the early filmmaking practices. The screening history of early cinema was officially inaugurated on the 20th December 1895 in a small basement room of the Grand Café Hotel in Paris, the capital city of France. The basement room was called Les Salons Indiens. Les Salons Indiens means the Indian parlor. So, interestingly, India was very much an indirect participant in the first ever public screening of films. Altogether, 33 spectators attended the first screening, paying 1 French franc for a ticket. In this first public screening, arranged for a ticketed audience, the French brothers Auguste Lumière and Louis Lumière showcased their 10 short actuality films. The Lumière brothers were associated with the manufacturing of photographic plates and related tools. The duration of the Lumière black and white films ranged from 30 to 50 seconds only. For screening these films, the Lumière brothers used their newly invented wonder machine, the cinematography. The cinematography was a combination of a portable movie camera and a portable movie projector. In this world premiere exhibition event, the following 10 early Lumière films were screened. They are arranged here according to the order of their screenings and with their corresponding English titles: Workers Leaving the Lumière Factory, The Gardener, The Disembarkment of the Congress of Photographers in Lyon, Horse-Tricked Riders, Fishing for Goldfish, Blacksmiths, Baby's Breakfast, Jumping into the Blanket, Cordelia Square in Lyon, and Bathing in the Sea. Let's now watch the first three of the early Lumiere films. The early films are often called actuality films or actualities. From 1896, the Lumiere brothers screened the films in most of the major cities of the world through their representatives. These cities include New York, London, Bombay, now Mumbai, Montreal, etc. Cinema reached India on 7 July 1896 when Maurice Hastier, a French exhibitioner, screened films in Watson's Hotel in Bombay using the cinematography machine. The screening schedule included the Lumiere film Arrival of a Train. Let's watch the film Arrival of a Train by Louis Lumiere.
By 1905, about 1,500 actualities were shot and shown across the world using the Lumiere cinematography. The major features of these early Lumiere films are they are silent, they are shot on location, they are shot with a single reel of film, they are shot with a hand-crank fixed movie camera, their screenings are accompanied by a live orchestra and a running commentary. The length of each of these films were less than a minute, and most of them are shots of real events, not of staged events. However, it's historically incorrect to say that cinema began with the Lumiere brothers all of a sudden. Cinema was actually a culmination of various artistic performance and technological developments that happened over a long period of time. In Film Studies Glossary, the period before the birth of motion picture is generally known as the pre-cinema period. According to film historian Richard Abel, pre-cinema period not only refers to the apparatuses and inventions in which early cinema was predicated, but also refers to the cultural, philosophical, and socio-economic context within which it emerged. So, let's look into some of the major technological breakthroughs and artistic interventions which made the movies possible by the time of the Lumiere brothers and other pioneers like Thomas Alva Edison and Georges Méliès. The closest landmark in the history of the origin of cinema is the invention of still photography in 1827. Many cultural historians gave the credit of inventing still photography to the French inventor Joseph Niepce. A View from the Window at Le Gras was a title given to the first photograph taken by Joseph Niepce, using a device called the camera obscura. Camera obscura is one of the first generation photo capturing devices. Camera obscura literally means a darkened room or a dark chamber. In 1839, the photographic camera became a publicly accessible tool with the invention of daguerreotype by Louis Daguerre. The invention of still photography played a major role for the development of motion pictures some 7 decades later. Many historians believe that the history of moving pictures actually starts with the British photographer Edward Muybridge. In 1872, he tried to capture moving men and animals using a series of still cameras arranged sequentially with wires attached to the shutters of these cameras. When the moving objects touched these wires, the cameras would capture their bodily movement at that particular moment. Muybridge captured 12 sequential still shots of a trotting horse. When these individual but continuous still photographs were projected with Muybridge's image display machine, zoopraxiscope, at a particular speed, the illusion of movement was created in the human eye. Here are those 12 still images of the galloping horse captured by Edward Muybridge. When these discrete sequential images are projected at a particular speed, that is 24 frames per second or 24 FPS, the optical illusion of movement is created in the human mind. This optical illusion is generally known as persistence of vision.
The biological phenomenon of the persistence of vision in human eye retains the projected individual image in the retina a little longer even after its actual disappearance. So, such series of retentions of individual images create the illusion of movement in human mind. According to the film historian Eric Bana, Muybridge had foreshadowed a critical aspect of the documentary film. That's its ability to open our eyes to the worlds available to us, but for one reason or another not perceived. Unquote. Let's look at some other important inventions which also contributed to the origin of motion picture. In 1874, Jules Janssen, a French astronomer, captured a series of still shots of Venus passing the sun using his revolver photographic. Janssen's revolver photographic used individual film plates to catch each still shot. Jules Marey also contributed to the origin of cinema. Marey was a scientist cum photographer who was born in France. His contribution to the birth of cinema was his invention of the cinematographic gun. This gun could capture 12 still images of a moving object in a second. Using these gunshot pictures, in the 1890s, he studied the human and animal locomotion. For instance, using his gun photography, he studied how cats always fall on their feet while landing on a surface from a height. Another important name in the history of early film is that of Thomas Alva Edison, the American inventor. He invented the viewing machine kinetoscope in the early 1890s. Edison also established the world's first permanent commercial movie studio, the Black Maria, in New Jersey, in the United States of America in 1893. In this studio, he produced more than a dozen films from 1893 to 1901. Fred Oates' Sneeze, Rat Killing, Annabelle Dancer, and The Kiss were some of the popular movies produced by Edison during this period. Let's have a look at some extracts from these films of Thomas Alva Edison. Film scholars like Wheeler W. Dixon and Gentolyn Foster point out that Edison tried to foreground female sexuality, bodily masculinity, white racism, and anthropocentrism through his films. Despite such criticisms, Edison is acknowledged to be the first film practitioner who foresaw the immense entertainment possibility of the commercial potential of cinema. While Lumiere brothers dismissed cinema as an invention without a future, Edison foresaw the commercial possibilities and the cultural potential of the cinematic art. What are the major differences between the Lumiere cinematography and the Edison kinetoscope? The most important difference between the Lumiere's cinematography and Edison's kinetoscope is that the latter allowed only one viewer at a time during the projection, while the former allowed mass viewership at a time during the projection. To see a motion picture in Edison's kinetoscope, the audience had to peep into a hole in the machine one by one. At the same time, Lumiere films could be projected on screen and enjoyed while sitting comfortably in chairs along with others in a darkened auditorium. This was the reason why Edison's films failed to appeal the mass audience in the beginning. Edison's kinetoscope was heavier, which made it less portable, whereas Lumiere's cinematography was literally portable. Sensing the limitation of his projection machine, Edison later depended on Thomas Armat's Vitascope projecting device for screening his films. Most of Edison's films were shot in his permanent studio, the Black Maria. It is also important to note that most of the Lumiere films were shot on actual sites, whereas most of Edison's films were shot within the studio. George Méliès, a French by birth, is another important figure in the history of early cinema. In the initial years of the 20th century itself, Méliès tried to bring into cinema the elements of magic, fantasy, illusion, and even space travel. He also introduced many special effects like reverse rolling of the reel, masking, dissolves, hand coloring of films, and double exposure. Méliès's A Trip to the Moon, 1902, is generally referred to as one of the first science fiction or sci-fi movies. Méliès anticipated the space travel and interplanetary voyages through his film. Dixon and Foster say that George Méliès's trademark brand of phantasmagorical wizardry made him the godfather of special effects cinema. Let's watch a short scene from A Trip to Moon. Méliès, like Edison, opted to shoot his films within the studio. The Infernal Boiling Pot was another fantasy film directed by him. Film scholars praise Méliès for extending the optical illusionary possibilities of the cinematic art. For Méliès, film editing was more important than shooting because it's editing which gives film a style, a format, and a meaning. By the first decade of the 20th century, cinema got established as a popular entertainment industry around the world. Many permanent indoor theaters dedicated for the purpose of film screenings were built in different parts of the world during this time. Some of them were called Nickelodeons because each ticket was sold for 1 nickel or 5 cents in the US currency denomination. Odeon is the Greek word for roofed theater. Some of these early movie theaters are the La Ideal Cinema in France, that was built in 1902, the Nickelodeon in the US, built in 1905, and the Corsair Biograph Theater in Denmark, which was built in 1908. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, Edwin S. Porter produced more than 200 films. However, just 2 films, The Life of an American Fireman, 1903, and The Great Train Robbery, 1903, are enough to immortalize the name of the American filmmaker Edwin S. Porter in the history of film. In the first film, Porter combined actual documentary footages with stage shots in order to create the cinematic suspense. The second film is considered to be an archetypal film which inaugurated the Western as a subgenre in cinema. It had thieves, robbery, cops, vehicle rides, hot chases, gunshots, murders, and the final surrender. From the first decade of the 20th century till 1920s, David W. Griffith was a sensation in American film industry. Working across genres like the melodrama, romance, and adventure, Griffith highlighted cinema as a narrative form. He experimented with film techniques in which the adjustments made in the mechanical eye, that's the camera, were given primary importance. His magnum opus is The Birth of a Nation, 1915, which was based on the American Civil War. The huge box office success of this film could not rescue Griffith of the charges of racism and patriarchy, which are explicit in his films. Intolerance, 1960s, was another major cinematic epic created by Griffith. His films are also known for their effective use of close-up shots, large scenarios, and the fade-outs and fade-ins to indicate time-lapse. Griffith is believed to be the inventor of close-up shots. Most of his films are feature films. If the length of a film is 40 minutes or more, it is technically called a feature film. As mentioned earlier, the history of Indian cinema began on 17th July 1896 when Maurice Sestier exhibited films including Louis Lumiere's Arrival of a Train in Watson's Hotel in Bombay. Harishchandra Sakharam Bhatwadekar, a professional portrait photographer, was also present amongst the audience at Watson's Hotel. Eric Bernau says that probably H.S. Bhatwadekar was the first Indian buyer of the Lumiere cinematography. With cinematography, Bhatwadekar captured the documentary shots of a wrestling match held in Mumbai in 1899 at the Hanging Gardens. The title of his film was The Wrestlers, and it is considered to be one of the first indigenous Indian attempts in filmmaking. The first full-length motion picture produced by an Indian filmmaker is Raja Harishchandra, which was released on the 3rd May 1913. Of course, it was a silent film within a Marathi linguistic milieu and it was directed by Dada Saheb Phalke. Dada Saheb Phalke is known as the father of Indian cinema. Let's watch a scene from Raja Harishchandra. Alam Ara, 1931, directed by Ardeshir Irani, is considered to be the first Indian sound film. At present, India is a major player in the international film business. India has got more than 11,000 screens as of now. It produces about 2,000 films annually in different Indian languages. Indian cinema is unique in its visual idiom and for its general thrust on the melodramatic style centered around the joint family and domestic issues. In the history of early films, the 1920s witnessed a phenomenal presence of documentary film as a matured subgenre of film. Filmmakers like Robert Flaherty, Dziga Vertov, and John Grierson contributed greatly to the growth of documentary film. We will learn about documentary film in detail in another module. Charlie Chaplin also made his feature cinema debut in the 1920s. We have a dedicated module on Charlie Chaplin in this course. As Francois Jost puts it, during the era of silent film, silence became an aesthetic stake when silence was perceived less as an impediment than as an artistic choice. The history of silent films ends with the emergence of the first feature-length sound film, or the talkie, The Jazz Singer, 1927. It was a musical directed by the American filmmaker Alan Crosland. Let's watch a clip from the first sound movie.
Little devil, that's what they say, but to me, he's an angel of a joy.
To sum up, as Simon Popple and Joe Kemper opined, the history of academic study of cinema reveals a series of tensions between traditionally distinctive areas of study such as technology, aesthetics, audiences, and business. Therefore, we have to follow a synthetic model while engaging with cinema as an object of academic scrutiny. Thank you for watching this video.